Chodesh Kislev, first class on the book of Bereshit. And, the basis of Judaism is in the Torah Shebichtav, in the Jewish Bible. The Jewish Bible is the basis and foundation of all Jewish law, halakha. It's the foundation of Jewish thinking, Jewish philosophy, and it's the foundation of Jewish ethics. But interestingly, it's also the foundation of Western notions of morality and values. It's only when the Western world began to incorporate the ideas from the Torah that the Western world became a more civilized place to live in. Now, that last statement shouldn't really surprise anybody. But I want to tell you something that may surprise you. The 20th century French jurist, his name was René Cassin, and he was the co-author of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the UN. And for this he received the Nobel Peace Prize. And he has a long essay, and in this essay he notes that the Human Declaration, or the UN Declaration of Human Rights, is based upon the Ten Commandments, the Jewish Ten Commandments. He says this, and he won the Nobel Prize for what he did. So when I tell you that the Jewish Bible, not only, of course, it is the foundation of all of Judaism, but it influenced the Western world tremendously and in a very positive way. But let's put morality, let's put values, let's put religion on the side. I want to point, and by the way, this is going to be a short 5-minute introduction. We're going to get right into the book. I know that's what you want, but I really do feel that before we get into the book, I want to impart some of this information to you. I want to point out something else that may surprise you. You know that the Bible was translated into English. The King James Version of the Bible is actually a translation of the Hebrew Bible into English. And this translation exerted a very significant cultural influence because the translation into English was a treasure trove or a treasure house of English prose, allowing for the development of literature, allowing for the development not just of the language, the English language, but also a lot of the imagery and symbolism from the Bible became incorporated into the Western tradition, into the Western literary tradition. So you have, for example, John Steinbeck's East of Eden, right? You have Robinson's Gilad. You have Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. These are all books that were heavily influenced and that probably exist because the Jewish Bible was translated into English. So the influence of our Torah Shebichtav, is immense. And it's not just immense, but it's transformational. And I want to say one last thing before we start. What's great about the Torah Shebichtav, what's great about the Bible, the study of the Bible, and we will see it tonight, is that there is this duality. On the one hand, the words are simple. The words are clear. But on the other hand, together with the simplicity, the sentences, the ideas are deep and they're philosophical. That combination of simplicity on the one side and depth, profound thoughts on the other side is a unique feature that you will only find in the Torah Shebichtav. I'll give you an example. Let's say you read Plato, Plato's Republic. Let's say you can get through that book. It's not an easy book to get through. Let's say you read Kant or Wittgenstein, or let's say you read Jacques Derrida on post-structuralism, on grammatology, right? These books are deep. These books contain tremendous and sophisticated thinking, but they're almost impossible to read. If you try to get through a page of Jacques Derrida on grammatology, your eyes will glaze up, really by the end of the page, you're like, what's happening around me? Where am I? Because the book is really difficult, right? So these types of books are not accessible to the average individual. Now, put these books on the side. Look at the Talmud. The Talmud is a Jewish work. It has tremendous depth, tremendous jurisprudence, tremendous wisdom, but it's a hard book To study Gemara, you need to understand what you're reading. It's not easy. So what makes the Torah Shebichtav so special is that the ideas of the Torah are deep and profound, and as deep and profound as any other work, but you don't have to be a scholar. You don't have to be a brilliant person. You can even be semi-literate, open up the book, understand the Torah, and appreciate it as a God in your life. So this is one of the reasons, this is a reason that I said, let's start with the book of Bereshit. Let's start with the very first words in the Bible. Let's look at it, because there is a rabbinic saying, and the rabbinic saying is, Hafoch ba v'hafoch ba dekulava. Keep reading the Torah. Doesn't matter how much wisdom you have, doesn't matter what a great rabbi you are. Keep studying the Torah, because it will never stop giving you new pearls. It will never start giving you new ideas. It's always going to give you new things. So even though I've been studying Torah all my life, I love looking at the Torah Shebichtav. And by the way, I study Torah Shebichtav every single day because it is that inspiring. Okay, let's get right to the book. We have some books over there, the red books over there. I recommend that you take them. Mike, if you can give them out. We're going to start with the very first pasuk. If you could open up the book, it's page 7, right? Chapter 1, verse 1, right? And we're going to start with the word Bereshit. Bereshit is the very first word in the Chumash. Apparently, it's a simple word. Bereshit, if you look at the word Bereshit, it seems the root of the word Bereshit seems to be Rosh. Rosh in the sense of beginning. Like, for example, you have Rosh Hashanah. What is Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the year. So Bereshit. Bereshit seems to mean in the beginning. So if we read the verse with that thought in mind, we read Bereshit bara Elohim. In the beginning, God created, and I will explain every single word, by the way. Every single word I will explain, including the word Bereshit. But right now I'm just giving it a simple, run through. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Okay, before I explain the word Bereshit, which is the first word, I want to do a deep dive into the second word. What is the second word? Bara. The word bara in Hebrew has a very specific meaning. It means to create something out of nothing. The Chachamim, they say, yesh me'ayin. Yesh is something, ayin is nothing. Now, let's think about, for example, of an artist. Okay, so you're an artist, let's say you're a painter, and you're going to create this beautiful painting, right? So, was it Monet who painted the lily pads? I think I got that right. I hope I did. Anyway, so let's say you're going to paint this a pond with these beautiful lily pads. Now, in order to create this painting, what do you need? You need certain pre-existing tools. You need to have a paintbrush. You need to have the paint. You need to have the canvas, right? So that's called beri'ah yesh meyesh, where you're creating the painting something from something else, right? Or let's take Michelangelo. Michelangelo was a great sculptor, so he would get a slab of marble, and he would look at the marble, and he would see inside the marble what he wanted to create, and he would start chiseling away, and there it was. He was some crazy, brilliant artist, beyond belief. So that's not beri'ah, because why is it not beri'ah? Because it's not yesh me'ayin, it's yesh meyesh, right? That's called in Hebrew, that's called yesh meyesh. So that's the first thing about bara. So when you see the word bara, Bereshit bara Elohim, that means that God created something from complete and utter nothingness. Okay, let's get a little more deep into this. Rabbi Abraham Ibn Ezra. You heard of Rabbi Abraham Ibn Ezra? Rabbi Abraham Ibn Ezra was one of the great Sephardi commentators on the Chumash. Classic, you find them in Mikrot Gedolot, and you have several great commentators to the Chumash. One of them is Rashi. Rashi is more midrashic, right? So Rashi brings many of the midrashim. In contrast to Rashi, you have Ibn Ezra, who always tries to emphasize the literal meaning of the words, the literal meaning of the passages. And he says something very significant. He says, as human beings, we cannot create something out of nothing, and we cannot transform something into nothing, right? We can't do either, right? So for example, let's say somebody takes a torch and he burns down a house. So if a person burns down a house, well, there was something and now there's nothing. That's not true. From the perspective of physics and chemistry, of course, a house doesn't just disappear. It just transforms into different types of compounds, ashes, smoke, energy in terms of the fire. So it didn't disappear. So what the Avraham ben Ezra said almost 1,000 years ago is correct today. There is no such thing as yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. There is no such thing as ayin me'yesh. You can never make things disappear. So, bara, again, is what's special about the creation. That's one aspect. But there is another aspect. There is another aspect to the word bara, and I want to tell it to you now. Let's say I build a house. Let's say I'm a contractor. I'm a real estate developer. I build a house. Why am I building the house? Well, it could be one of several reasons. Perhaps I want to live in the house, so I need a place to live. Perhaps I'm in the business of building houses for others, so I'm doing it to make a living. There's a purpose. I need something, and that's going to fulfill my need. Bara is something else. You know what the word bara means? Bara means to create something, not because I need it, not because it fills a particular requirement. It's because I just want to do it. It's a purely volitional act. So when we say Bereshit bara, we don't only mean yesh me'ayin. We also mean that God didn't need anything. It's not that God was lacking something, and because he was lacking, so for example, it was dark, and because it was dark, he created the sun, so now he can see. No, that's not the case. Or God needed something in the universe, and now he has a universe. No. God created the universe as an act of, as a pure choice. And you say this every day in the tefillah, who knows where. Every day, several times you say that God creates as a purely volitional act. Who knows where? In the Kaddish. What do we say in the Kaddish? The second verse. We say be'almadi, in this world, right? Be'almadi berachir utet, that he built according to his thought. Be'almadi berachir utet, he built it as he wanted to build it. There was nothing there that compelled him or that required him to build, right? That's very important, and you will see why soon. Okay? So that's the thing. So we had Bereshit. I didn't explain the word Bereshit. I said in the beginning. I will explain it soon. But I did explain the word bara. So Bereshit bara Elohim. What is it that God created? Et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So commonly, probably if you look at the translation here, it's going to say heaven and earth. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth, and that's a common explanation. Let me explain to you what I believe Shamayim va'aretz means. Shamayim, of course, means the sky. Aretz means the earth. So, if you consider the fact that the earth is an insignificant speck in the Milky Way galaxy, why even mention it? I mean, so what? So God created the earth. God created who knows how many planets, who knows how many suns, and who knows how many galaxies. So, and then it says Shamayim and the heavens. What does that mean? So this is the pishat, what I'm about to tell you. Shamayim va'aretz is a code term. It's the way, how do you say universe in Hebrew? So in modern Hebrew you say yakum. The word yakum, you didn't have it. That's a new Hebrew. That's a new word in Hebrew. How do you say universe in ancient Hebrew? Shamayim va'aretz. Shamayim va'aretz is a way to say the entire cosmos. Everything that exists, the entire cosmos, you say Shamayim va'aretz. And now you understand the verse better. We're not talking about just the planet Earth. The planet Earth is not such a great, thing. The whole planet, what is it, 8,100 mile diameter at the equator. It's not particularly impressive in the universe, but Shamayim Va'aretz, the cosmos, is an incredible creation, right? So that's what Shamayim Va'aretz is. And I want now to go back to the word bara.
That's more expansive. Very good idea. Meaning it's not just the limited Earth.
It's not just the planet Earth. It's the entire.
It's all physical and spiritual reality.
By the way, what you just said is even deeper. I mean, it's correct, and I didn't even say it yet. It's all physical reality. It's all spiritual reality. Anything that exists, right? From the Earth to the sun to the entire solar system to the comets to the galaxy, everything.
And there's even more that we don't even know.
And there's much more that we don't even know is there. There is now what we know is that most of the universe is composed of dark matter. We don't even know what dark matter is.
It's unknowable matter, what it really means. Unknowable. It's not dark. It's just they don't know what it is. It's just.
I'm sorry?
Then it's wrong for us to call the sky.
No, because words are many words are homonyms, and many words have particular meaning that change according to their context. But when you have that expression shamayim va'aretz together, that's the way you say cosmos in Hebrew. But when we just say shamayim can also mean the sky, of course, absolutely, and aretz can also mean the earth, right? So that's just the way language works. Okay, so I want you to think about this for a second. If everything is out of nothing, right? Meaning there was nothing. So now think about it. So God creates the world. He puts all the rules of science in the world. So everything that is here because he wanted it to be so. So what does that mean? So what is the word in Hebrew for God? Amonai. What does Amonai mean? Amonai, for example, what does Adon? Adon means master. So what does Amonai mean? So when you say Adon, you mean the master of, for he is his master, or he is my boss. I work, I'm in the store, he's my boss. Or master, I'm providing him services, so he's the master. That's Adon. So I have to listen to the Adon. Amonai means the master of everything and everyone. And now you see the relationship between the name of God and the word bara. Because God created the world as he wanted to create it, and there was no limitations, he made all the rules, he decided exactly how the world will function. He is the ultimate master. And how do you say ultimate master in Hebrew? Don't say it, because we're not allowed to say the name of God in vain. Amonai. Now you see what the word Amonai means, and now you see the relationship between bara and Amonai. Okay, that's important. So, and I want to say something else about this. In the West, yeah. No, it's fine. I'm going to explain the word Elohim. I'm just explaining to you what the word Amonai, where does the word Amonai come from? But here we say Bereshit Elohim. I will explain that in a moment. Correct. Because God has several names. God has several names. One of them is Amonai, which is the ultimate, let's say the highest level is the word Amonai. Then under it is Elohim, and then there's other names, right? Okay. I want now also, because we're going to be getting in a few months to the book of Shemot and the idea of miracles, and this will be a good place to explain the following. For the Western world, we live in a world where we live in the world of causality. So there's scientific rules. We all understand the scientific rules. We feel comfortable with them. We know what's going to happen. If I take a ball and I bounce it, it's going to bounce back. Bounce back up. If I throw it, it'll go where I aim it to, and so on and so on. So we feel very comfortable with causality. We don't feel comfortable with miracles. Miracles make no sense. And when we study about miracles and we hear what happened in Egypt, or we hear about other miracles, we try to, in our mind, process it in a Western way, try to give it some logical explanation, and we become a little disoriented by the idea of miracles. But this verse answers that question. Bara, yesh me'ayin. God chose the rules to be in this world. It was a choice. And he had complete sovereignty, and he is the absolute master. And therefore, he who created the laws of the world can just as easily uncreate them, can just as easily suspend these laws. And what do we call it when God suspends a particular law? Nes, a miracle. That's a miracle. So all a miracle is the flip side of bara. If you accept that God was bara, that God created yesh me'ayin, then you can also accept, well, yeah, I mean, he's above the world. He's not bound by the laws. He created the laws. And if he created the laws, I mean, he's above it. So he'll erase a sentence in the book and put another sentence there.
Manipulate his desire.
He can manipulate the world as he wants to do it, and that's exactly what a miracle is. So Shemesh begiv on dom. So Joshua is fighting a war against the nations in Israel, and there's not enough time, so the sun is going to set, and when the sun sets, they're going to run away, and he won't be able to finish the battle, and he really wants to finish the battle. So he says, Shemesh begiv on dom. He prays to God. God, make the sun stand still. That's a miracle. But the law of gravity says that the earth is always orbiting, well, actually it's rotating around its axis, which is what causes the sunrise, sunset. So if the earth is always orbiting around its axis, or it's spinning around its axis like a dreidel, right? There'll be sunrise and sunset. That's a law of nature, it is. But God can suspend it. He says, no, now there's going to be whatever a force causes the earth to spin around its axis, I suspend it. Later on, the war is successful, and God says, okay, let's go back to the regular rules of nature. Yes, sir?
The laws of nature are miraculous inherently, and it's just a matter of frequency that they don't look like a miracle to us.
I will give you my own opinion. Honestly, I love studying science. I love understanding the world. I love seeing the incredible balance in the world at so many different levels in physics and cosmology and biology and ecology. Amazing things in the world. Did you ever see that video how reintroducing wolves into Yellowstone Park actually changed the course of the river? What's the connection, right? There's no connection. So, but stuff like this, it blows the mind away, and you realize everything in the world is perfectly balanced. You know what I think the great miracle is? Kiryat Yamsuf was a great miracle. It really was. The Eis Makot in Egypt was a great miracle. You know what I think the great miracle was? The order. I think the order is a much greater miracle than the disorder that you see in miracle. I think the great miracle is the fact that the world works so perfectly and so incredibly well. I think that's the miracle. But again, it's just a question of being in the Western mindset, so we're used to causality. We expect the order, and because we expect it, we're not impressed by it, and we become surprised when the order suddenly switches. For the Jewish mind, it's not surprising because we have the word bara. Okay. All right, now, I want to say one more thing, and I will prove this. I don't think we're going to get to it today, but I will prove it perhaps next week if we don't get to it today. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Okay, 1 plus 1 equals 2. Is it possible for 2 plus 2 to equal 5?
No.
Right, because we live in this world, and 2 plus 2 equals 4. So I want to show you that this, that 2 plus 2 equals 4, is itself a choice of God. It's how God programmed the world. It's true that 2 plus 2 in this world equals 4, but it could have easily been 2 plus 2 equals 5. I want to show this to you, but give me to the next, not now. As we go further in the verses, you will see what I am talking about. But once you understand this, you will understand the Torah and you will understand God.
But isn't it dependent on the price of the accountant?
Okay. Okay, that's what I wanted to say about the word bara. Now that we understand the second word, I now want to go back to the first word. What does the word Bereshit mean? Bereshit means Berosh. Berosh, we have some seats here. Yes.
Thank you.
If you wish, just be careful with you. Okay, what does the word Bereshit mean? So, in the beginning, so let me tell you something. Let's say I want to study any science. I want to study physics. I want to study mathematics. Anything you study, there are going to be certain axioms that you have to accept blindly. And if you're not willing to accept these axioms, the scientific system that you're studying just won't work. As simple as thing, geometry. They teach geometry to kids in school, right? And anybody have kids in high school? They still teach that? Yes, right? Okay, so they still teach geometry and then trigonometry and then, okay. So they teach geometry. So what is geometry based upon? Geometry is based upon a series of axioms, and you have to accept the axioms. For example, they tell you the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. And based upon that, they build other shapes and other designs, and you can figure out the angles and you figure out the measurements. Okay, but there's axioms. By the way, the shortest distance between 2 points is actually not a straight line. In astronomy, the shortest distance between 2 points is usually a curved line depending on the shape of space, but it doesn't matter. Because when you're teaching geometry to a child or to an adult, there's going to be certain axioms that you have to accept, and if you're not willing to accept the axioms, you'll never be able to study the particular science that is being taught to you. What does the word Bereshit mean? We said Bereshit, we always think of Bereshit as beginning in time, in the beginning. But it's a little problematic, because how can you say in the beginning if there was no time? Time itself was created. So we mean in the beginning. There was no time at that point. Or I say at that point. Okay. This is not me. My father, Alav Hashalom, used to teach this to me. And then my father told me that the idea came to him from a book written by the Ben Shem Tov, Ben Shem Tov, a beautiful gold book. My father had a beautiful library. And so the idea comes from Ben Shem Tov, Ben Shem Tov, from centuries ago in the Gerush Sefarad, one of the great Chachamim, who was expelled from Spain. And he says something very profound. He says, yes, the word Bereshit does come from the word Rosh. Rosh means head, beginning, as in Rosh Hashanah. But it's not a beginning in time, because there was no time. It's a beginning in thought. It's an axiom. In other words, if you want to read this book, there is an axiom. You must first accept this axiom. If you're not willing to accept it, then take the book and close it, because there's no point in reading the book. The same way, if you're not willing to accept that the short distance between 2 points is a straight line, don't study geometry, study something else. So it is axiomatic. What is axiomatic? Bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. It is axiomatic to every single Jew, to every person studying Torah, that God is bara. What does bara mean? I explained bara, right? We spent 20 minutes on the word bara. You must accept that as an axiom, that the entire cosmos is beri'ah yesh me'ayin. Let's go deeper. Let's go deeper. There's two major theses regarding the universe. One is the scientific approach. The other is the approach of the Torah. Okay. Let's think about the scientific approach, and you'll see where I'm going to in a moment. Scientists say that somehow the universe, or nature, or Mother Nature, that they affectionately call this thing Mother Nature. I don't know why Mother. Is that scientific or is that psychological? Let's think about that. Okay. So they call it Mother Nature. Somehow Mother Nature created itself, or the laws of physics created themselves, right? So everything in this perfectly tuned universe, fine-tuned universe, somehow came about by itself, and it evolved, and I will describe some of the evolution soon, because there are some things that science knows. There are things that science knows. I don't discount science, and I will show you how the description of the universe, in the next verse, it is precisely aligned with the description of the pre-Big Bang universe that scientists know. So there are some things that scientists know. But nevertheless, they say, how did this come about? It just came about. It just happened. It was just kind of a coincidence. Things just evolved as they will. Okay. The Torah teaches us, no. The Torah teaches us, no, it didn't just come about. It was Beriah Yesh Me'ayin. There was absolute nothing. And from the nothing came something. And that's God, Bara, Yesh Me'ayin. So these are the two theses, right? It's either the scientific thesis that things just happened, or the Jewish thesis that things were created. Okay, let me ask a question. So we believe that God created the universe, Yesh Me'ayin. Can you prove it? No. Can you prove it? No, you can't. Rambam says in the Moned Nevuchim that the human mind can either accept it or reject it, but it can't be demonstrated with definitiveness. Okay, let me now switch the tables. Switch the table. Can you prove the scientific thesis of creation? Can you prove that the universe somehow created itself, unguided, by itself? It just came into being. Can you prove that? No, you can't. So, to summarize, science can't demonstrate that the world wasn't created. And I noticed, I've seen debates between, what's that scientist who wrote Well, no. There's a scientist, Dawkins, Richard Dawkins. And then there's another scientist whose name I forget. And it really, I like listening to, I like listening to all sides. I really want to understand. And anyway, I noticed that Richard Dawkins in his, debates, he gets very agitated. He gets really agitated, like, why can't you just accept that there is no creator to the world? I'm exaggerating a little. But he gets agitated. He gets nervous. It ticks him off. So he wrote a book called The Blind Watchmaker. Okay, let me ask you a question. Science cannot demonstrate that the world wasn't created. They just can't. We can't demonstrate that the world was created. Okay, so Harambam in the Moned Ruchim says exactly what I just said, and he uses an amazing word in Arabic. The word he uses is i'tikad. I'tikad. Does anybody hear something i'tikad? Does it sound familiar to somebody? Is there a Hebrew word? Akedah? Akedat Yitzhak? The binding of Yitzhak, where Yitzhak was bound to the Mizbeach. So what is i'tikad? So i'tikad is the Arabic word that Rambam uses for belief. So what does that mean? So there's a word akada in Arabic. Akada means a contract. You bind yourself to an agreement, right? So it's like a knot, and you tie yourself to that, whatever you're binding yourself to. It's a commitment. So i'tikad means that precisely because your mind is limited, and you cannot prove that the world was created by God. You can't prove that the world wasn't created by God. So what are you left with? You're left with a choice. You bind yourself to a particular choice. You must make an i'tikad. You must say, I believe what my parents taught me. I believe what their parents taught them. I see the universe. I see the world. I see the splendor. I understand the fine-tuning of the universe. I bind myself to the idea that there must be a creator. That's called the i'tikad. But the scientists also have to make an i'tikad. The scientists also have to make a decision. I insist that there is no creator. You can't prove it. It's not a scientific thing. It's just, it's a commitment, and you will get agitated, and you will get annoyed. Why can't people accept it? There was a scientist, I forget his name, who wrote a series of books. One of them is called The Signature of the Cell, and there's a few other books that I read. Amazing. He's a scientist. He's actually a world-class scientist teaching in university, and he actually shows scientifically that it is so incredibly absurd to say that there is no creator. I wonder whether if Harambam was aware of what we are aware of today, whether Harambam would have said, you can't prove it. Well, you can't prove it. You cannot prove it. There's a lot of signposts that point in that direction, but nevertheless, you must make a choice. And that's the idea of Bereshit. Bereshit means this is an axiom. You willing to accept it? Okay. Read. Continue reading. You don't want to accept it? No problem. Read Richard Dawkins and think about what a nihilistic worldview you're buying into. But that's fine. That's your choice. That's your belief. Accept it. That's the point of Harambam in the Moreh Nebuchim. Ultimately, in this world, you are going to make a choice of belief. You can't accept that. You either believe there is a God or you believe there is no God. But it's always going to be a belief, right? There was a great philosopher of science from the 19th century. His name was Bertrand Russell. Anybody hear of Bertrand Russell? Yes. He was one of the most prominent logicians of the 20th century, and he says that there is this whole idea of there's a platonic truth, there's a real truth out there. He mocks it. For example, he brings an example. Let's say you see something in a microscope, so you see it, it's there. Well, actually what you're seeing is the result of the lenses and the shape of the lenses, and he says you're trusting that whoever created those lenses did it such so that what you're seeing is actually some sort of detail of reality. But you have to trust the microscope, and you have to trust that it's properly designed. So that's an act of trust. When you watch a news report, for example, on CNN. It's an act of trust. You're assuming that they're not intentionally trying to deceive you. It's an assumption. It may be correct. And for the few people who still watch CNN, it may be that the assumption is incorrect. But you need to have an act of emunah. And I want to read to you, with your permission, I want to read to you part of a paragraph in Bertrand Russell's book, The Will to Doubt. It's a great paragraph. I want you to hear it. And the point of this paragraph is to say that ultimately all human knowledge is at most a guess. A good guess, perhaps, but a guess. This is a scientist. This is not a theologian. This is one of the most respected scientists of the Western century, of the 20th century in the Western world. Here goes. You ready? None of our beliefs, when he says our beliefs, he's talking about science, are quite true. All have at least a penumbra of vagueness and error. For example, now we have quantum mechanics, we have the theory of relativity, unified theory. Can't figure that one out. Maybe they will. The methods of increasing the degree of truth in our beliefs are well known. They consist in hearing all sides, trying to ascertain all relevant facts, controlling our own bias by discussion with people who have the opposite bias. And then he says the following: every man of science whose outlook is truly scientific is ready to admit that what passes for scientific knowledge at the moment is sure to require correction with the progress of discovery. You heard that? I'm going to say that again. Every man of science whose outlook is truly scientific is ready to admit that what passes for scientific knowledge at the moment is sure to require correction with the progress of discovery. And this is true. This is absolutely true. Science is always changing. They're always refining. I'm not saying that they're going to one day discover that the theory of relativity is incorrect, but they're going to make a lot of discoveries about the way this whole thing works, right? There's going to be refinements. There's going to be adjustments. There will be some things that we reject and leave behind. There will be other ideas that we don't even have now, and that will take us forward, right? That's the nature of science. So even when you believe in science, I believe in the science. No, actually you believe in the scientists, and the scientists themselves are human beings who make errors and have beliefs and have prejudices, and they reach whatever conclusions they want to reach. Not saying not to believe in the science. But don't ever come to me and tell me, oh, the science says this and the Torah says that. I consider that to be nonsensical. Because science is a belief and the Torah is a belief, and here's the difference between science and the Torah. I don't want to sound preachy, because my point was not to be preachy. But what's the main difference between science and the Torah? There is one outstanding feature. The Torah, the words we read now, the truth of the Torah is eternal. We never needed to adjust it. We never needed to change it. We never needed to refine it. It's the same exact words, and it makes as much sense today and is as brilliant, and you will see the scientific connections in the verses as we read them. They're mind-blowing. I mean, they are literally, you will I'm going to read to you a description of the Big Bang universe, and I will read to you what the Torah says, and you're like, whoa, like that doesn't make any sense, right? I think, by the way, my cousin, Rabbi Yossi Biton, who was a rabbi here before me, I think he wrote a book called Awesome Creation, and I believe in that book he actually goes into some of the, I think he draws some of the connections in that book, so you might want to look at the book. I saw a copy as I walked in. I think it's over there, so, okay. Okay, that was a lot. Yeah, one question and then I want to read.
Most science is speculative. Most science.
Well, I mean, let's be fair to the science. There are aspects to science that have become settled, right? And then there are, but together with the settled science, there are vague aspects at the border, right? Now the problem with science is that scientists they come up with these. For example, there's an archaeologist called Hancock. Graham Hancock. So he believed that there was human civilization in the Americas 10,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, and they used to mock him. And they wouldn't let him publish any of his articles in archaeological journals, and he was shunned by all the archaeologists, and he started writing books. He didn't care, he was writing books. Now, For years he was mocked. For decades he was mocked. If anybody would dare publish any of his articles in their journal, they will it'll be like a tremendous, what is wrong with you? How can you publish that article? He ends up being completely right. I mean, he's on Joe Rogan all the time, and he's been vindicated, and now he's like, yeah, there was civilization in the America 10,000, 12,000 years ago, just like Jana. I think his name is Graham Hancock. I hope I'm not mispronouncing it, but just do Joe Rogan Hancock. It's there. By the way, it's an amazing series of interviews he has. I love that type of stuff. For those who like that, it's great. It's good stuff. But that's an example. So science is an emunah. Nothing wrong with it, but it is.
It's more faith than religion, because you're taking a leap that is just like to say something, this world has no design.
Yes,
Just
correct.
Like, would say the pizza pie just got here. That's what they say, because you need a lot to make a pizza pie.
Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I hate to say it, but many times scientific method and discovery is prejudiced to who's paying the grant.
That's right.
Yeah, no question. There's no question. And by the way, I don't want to come out as, you brought that up, so I want to say, the way science works is, what you just said is absolutely true, and it works at so many different levels. Yeah, I don't want to get into that, so I'll pass on to what I was about to say, and I will go on. So just to be clear, so if you're a Jew, if you're a physicist, right, you have to accept the second law of thermodynamics. If you don't want to accept the second law of thermodynamics, don't study physics. Study history, study, I don't know, Wittgenstein, don't study physics, right? If you don't want to accept that God created the universe, yesh me'ayin, don't study this book. So there is the first pasuk, I want to just say one last point. You ready? So I said you have to make all these assumptions, right? In science, you have to make assumptions. You have to make assumption that the microscope works well, that the telescope is correct, that the information that they're gathering is correct, that the processing of the data is correct, right? The conclusions they're reaching are correct, and oftentimes they're not. We know that. There is one overarching assumption that everybody makes. We're all making this assumption all the time. Do you know what that assumption is? The assumption we are all making is that the human brain, the human mind, can solve these problems and reach their correct conclusion. Prove that to me. For example, you have a dog. Dogs are intelligent creatures. They're man's best friend. They're fun. My kids want me to get a dog. I'm not doing it, but it doesn't matter. But okay. But can a dog understand algebra? No. There's nothing wrong with the dog. I'm not saying the dog is bad or good, but he can't understand algebra. If I have a problem in derivative calculus, can I go to the dog and say, can you help me with this problem? No. He doesn't have the mental faculty to solve problems related to derivative calculus. Okay, why are we in the Western world all so convinced that the human mind has the equipment to solve problems and to reach correct conclusions? Who says? Well, who says? The human mind says. But if the human mind can't solve all problems and can't reach correct conclusions, who says that the conclusion that the human mind can solve problems is a correct conclusion? That itself is an overarching assumption. It's an incredible assumption. Prove it. You can. I think it was C.G. Jung. C.G. Jung in his book, Psychology and Religion, a great passage where he says that actually he says that psychology is the greatest science. So he was a psychologist. And by the way, he was a brilliant man, C.G. Jung. And he says psychology is the greatest science because it is the science of the mind. And any time you process any information, it's always through the mind. And if you don't understand how the mind is working, how can you know that the information you're processing to reach whatever scientific conclusions you're trying to reach is actually accurate information? Right? So he says, that's why he says, I'm a psychologist. He was kind of like explaining why he became a psychologist. Nevertheless, it's just an assumption. And it's okay. It may be correct to a certain extent. Because no, the human mind can't solve all problems. We can solve many problems. But our intellect is limited. It's not infinite. Question somebody was raising. Yes, Mark.
I think you answered it, but God created our mind, right? He gave us the capacity and the duty to go, kind of understand the world.
Yes.
So is there some thinking that he limited that for a particular reason so that we're forced to still have a belief?
Yes. The idea that the human mind is limited is in the Jewish mystical writings, and what they call Kabbalah, we call it Sod, and Harambam writes a lot about that, and he has a whole chapter and chapters in the Moreh Nebuchim describing the limitations of human understanding. Suffice it to say for now that there are intellectual life forms that have no because we're biological, right? There are intellectual life forms called malachim and different types of creations that Hashem created in the universe that are far superior to us intellectually. And we next to these life forms is perhaps like Fido is next to us, where we're inferior. So we know there's many different limits to intelligence. And Shlomo HaMelech, who was the wisest man, right? Shlomo HaMelech, he says, Rachok, Rachok mi'im se'enan. He says, Gavoa me'al Gavoa. He says, you want to know what wisdom is? He says, go higher and higher and higher, and you still won't reach the end. So we can do a lot with our minds. Our minds are incredible. I'm not saying they're not. They're amazing, but they're not infinite. And we're talking about the infinite here. Okay. Let's look at the next word. So we did the word Bereshit, we did the word Shamayim Va'ares, we did Bara, Elohim. I want to explain to you why the word Elohim is used here. Elohim, of course, is one of the names of God. We said there's Amonai. I explained to you the word Amonai before. The Zohar points out that the word Elohim in Gematria, if you take the numerical value of each letter, equals Hateva. The Zohar says that. It's a nice midrash. I actually like it. Teva means nature. And the idea of the Zohar is that when you describe the creation of the natural world, it is the God who puts in place the natural laws. That's why we refer to him as Elohim. I mean, Elohim is the name of the one God. It's one of several names for the one God because it's looking at a certain aspect of that God. What aspect? That God created the natural world with precise laws, and that's why it equals Hateva. The word Amonai is used more with respect to personal things. So let's say if God appears, to the Navi, I might use the word Amonai, right? If God appears in a more awesome, scary fashion, Midat Hadin, it might be Elohim. So the words are used depending on what the situation is. There's always a reason why sometimes it uses the word Amonai, sometimes it uses the word Elohim. Here it uses the word Elohim because we're talking about the creation of the natural world and the rules that God put in the natural world. That's important. Let's continue now. Okay, so now we have the first word. So we have Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. That's the first pasuk in the book of Bereshit. Now I want to begin the second pasuk. Okay. It says, V'ha'ares hayeta tohu vavohu. I'm going to first explain the literal meaning of these verses. The world, right? The material world was tohu. The word tohu means emptiness. Vavohu. Bohu means complete chaos. So it was empty and it was chaotic. Everything will be explained. And it says, V'choshech al penei tehom. Tehom means there was an abyss. Abyss literally means imagine a bottomless pit, right? A bottomless abyss, an infinite abyss, right? And there was darkness over this infinite abyss. And okay, what does this mean? So you have this infinite abyss, it's called Tehom, and you have Ruach Elohim merachefet al penei hamayim. And you have this water. What is that water? We'll explain. But you have the wind of God, merachefet al penei hamayim. You have the wind of God hovering over this liquid state of the universe. Literal translation of the Pesukim. So now we're going to try to unravel what's happening here. I want to start with Ruach Elohim. Ruach Elohim, the great Sephardi Chacham, Rabbi David Kimchi, he was a generation after Harambam. He was from Provence, France. Provence had great Talmidei Chachamim. One of them was Rabbi David Kimchi. He says Ruach Elohim means a powerful wind. Because, for example, Hara Elohim means an awesome mountain. So he says Ruach Elohim means a powerful wind. That's a standard explanation. Humbly, I disagree. I interpret it differently. And I think the key here is the word merachefet. What do we say in the tefillah every day? When we speak about the wind. Well, in the winter we say it. What do we say? Mashiv haruach. Or morida geshem. What is mashiv haruach? Mashiv means God blows the wind, right? Right? Menashevet haruach, right? So he blows the wind. Here it doesn't say V'ruach Elohim noshevet al penei hamayim. It says merachefet. Why? Why does it use a different word? And I think that's the key. Lerachef means to hover over, right? Where do you have this word in the Chumash? It appears again. There is a passage in Perashat Ha'azinu, and this passage is describing the special love and the special providence that God has for the Jewish people. And the pasuk says as follows: it says, "Kenesher ya'ir keno," like a beautiful vulture. You know, you see these beautiful birds in the in Africa. So this huge bird, incredible wingspan. It's hovering over the nest, right? It wants to look at the babies, the chicks, and it wants to feed them. And before it feeds them, it hovers over the nest. So it says God was like that when the Jewish people were in Egypt. We were the nation. We were like babies. We still, we couldn't defend ourselves. We needed God to come there and take us out of Egypt and do all the things He did for us. So it was like God came into Egypt and He hovered over us because He wanted to protect us. So merachefet, it says keneshir ha'ir kino al gozalav. Who knows the next word? Yerachef, same word. Yerachef. So what does the word merachefet mean? It's a word used to describe the special providence of God. So what this means is as follows: that even in this state of complete emptiness, of complete chaos, darkness, void, God was there, and He was tenderly about to take care of the universe and put things into place. The same way a father would take care of his child, the same way the Nesheb takes care of the Gozalim, Hashem was there about to take care of this precious universe. Hashem is always present, and He's always looking at His creations, even before the creations came into being. Even before, when I say came into being, this is the earliest thing that the human mind can understand. We can understand Tohu Vavohu. We can't understand what came before Tohu Vavohu. That we can't understand, and nor can the scientists. And I'm going to explain that next week. I'm going to explain what Tohu Vavohu is. I didn't explain it yet, right? That's going to be next week because we don't have the time. So what I will do is I will take any questions. We have 2-3 minutes left. If you have any questions, we'll do it next week. I am going to bring to you a description of the Big Bang. I will bring to you a description from Stephen Hawking of before the Big Bang. We will compare it to the Pesukim, and I will ask you to judge for yourselves whether the two things are perfectly aligned or not, and then ask yourself, how the heck were these verses around thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago? Figure it out on your own. I'm just going to present it to you. But next week, another thing before, and I do want to get to your question. Next week we'll do it on Wednesday or Tuesday. Does anybody have a preference between Wednesday and Tuesday? If anybody feels that Wednesday? Wednesday? Is anybody here feel strongly otherwise? So next week we will be here Wednesday night. I believe there will be pizza. I believe we have a good subject. I want to hear your question, please.
If God created the world, why did He create it as Tohu and Vohu?
Why did He create what?
Why did He create His first creation was Tohu Vavohu? Why?
Right, because Tohu Vavohu is as far back as the human mind can see. What was before that?
God can create it in a different way.
No, it's true. But because there was no rule. God created rules after He created mass. Science agrees. The rules came afterwards. That's the way He did it. Why?
I don't understand why. Why wouldn't you just create it in a more advanced way?
Don't know.
It's already creating.
Why didn't He just create the world? Boom, here it is.
Yeah, perfect.
Maybe because He thought that if we can look back in time, we would understand there was an unraveling of creation, because if it just existed, how would you ever see the hand of God in the world?
Study the creation unless it's created.
You can't study the creation unless it's creation. So but the point is, but now we can see it. We can understand that God is always saying, guys, I'm here. Just look. right? I would pray Arvit. No, it's up to you. So no, Rabbi Hanina Melech Hashem